Hello, everyone. We're delighted that you can join us today. A particularly warm welcome to our virtual audience, of course, to everyone here in the room. My name is Iris Bonnet. I teach here at the school, and this is the seminar on behavioral science for inclusive organizations. So today, it is with enormous pleasure that I introduce our speaker, Dwana Franklin-Davis, who will talk to us about what companies should know about rebooting their corporate policies for impact. Something we all deeply care about, particularly because many of the things that we are doing that are popular in this country and in others are not working. So we really look forward to your presentation. Now, Dwana is passionate about technology, and she's also passionate, and maybe even more passionate, about increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in technology, with a particular focus on women of color, on Black women, on Latina women, and on Native American women. Before being the CEO of the Reboot Representation company, she worked in IT, software engineering, leadership positions with MasterCard, made department store companies, and IBM. And I think Dwana and we got to know each other through Pivotal Ventures, which some of you might know is the investment and incubation company that was launched by Melinda French Gates. So, Dwana, we're delighted to have you here. The plan is for you to share some of your thoughts for 30 to 40 minutes, and then for us to open the floor and take questions both from our virtual audience and from our in-person audience. Dwana, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you all. Also, first of all, happy Monday. Happy Black History Month. Yay. Right? Yay. I heard a couple yays in the room. So I am excited to be able to chat with you, and I would love for this to be interactive. I would love for you to start thinking of your questions, and I know that there's going to be ample opportunity for you to ask. We are very focused on data and how you're able to leverage and utilize data to tell a story or reflect the type of information that you're looking to accomplish or receive. So data is powerful. I'm assuming you can all see my slides. I see like a clip of it. So I'm going to go to our next slide. And I'll preface it with a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting on the couch with my hubby, and we were watching a documentary on Netflix. And there was a clip from an American singer by the name of Nina Simone. So this is also my Black history contribution to today's segment. So for those of you who are unaware of who Nina Simone is, I can just go to the next slide. She is an American singer, songwriter, pianist, composer, arranger, and also a civil rights activist. And there was a clip of an interview that she did in 1969 that was presented in this documentary. And it resonated so deeply with me that I made my husband pause and rewind 3 times because I needed it to really sink in. So what I have in front of you is the full article or the full quote that was from her original interview. But the part that stands out is what I've got highlighted in red, basically saying, and at this crucial time in our lives, when everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but to be involved. And she was speaking about this in terms of being an artist and having a platform. But it really stuck with me because even though this quote was something that she said in 1969, I feel like it's still very relevant today, which may be a little bit sad. But also for all of us in whatever seat that we sit in, I think that we have to be active and engaged and can't be innocent bystanders to the things that are happening and the things that we're passionate about and the things that we care about. So I want to get kicked off with that. So as we will talk a little bit about data, and I'll give you a little bit more of Reboot's origin story. So as Reboot Representation Tech Coalition was born from Pivotal Ventures way back in 2017, when we were wanting to understand more about what was happening in the landscape for philanthropy and also what was happening with regards to women of color in tech. So you might hear me say the acronym BLNA. So what I'm saying is BLNA for Black, Latino, Native American. We use that acronym instead of terms like BIPOC because we're being more specific and intentional with regards to who we talk about and who we're serving. So in 2017, we were looking at the public data that's available on who is graduating with computing degrees in the United States. So I know there might be some global listeners that are watching virtually, so I apologize in advance, but our data is mostly focused on US centric data. But the concepts are still going to be the same around the globe, depending on what you apply it to. So who's graduating with computing degrees? And what this chart shows you is the percentage of BLNA women receiving computing degrees and how it has dropped by 33% over a decade. So between 2017 is when we started tracking, and the decade before, the numbers were steady going down specifically for BLNA women, which was very alarming. We also wanted to examine, as part of our fun initial report, what's happening with corporate giving, because we were hearing a lot in the media about what are the numbers increasing, and there was lots of finger pointing. Well, it's higher ed, it's post-secondary, it's K-12, it's corporate. So where does the onus lie, and what do the numbers actually look like? So as part of our initial survey, there were 32 companies that were part of the survey. Those organizations represented 500 billion in revenue. They represented 500 million in philanthropic giving. And sadly, they were only spending 5% of that 500 million on women and girls in tech, but only spending 0.1% of that 500 million on, it says women of color, but specifically Black, Latina, and Native American women and girls in tech. So the magic number from that 2017 data is $335,000. That's it. So Pivotal did not want to just release a report and say, hey, y'all, this really sucks. And then, as reports do, they sit on the shelf and collect dust. So, Reboot Representation Tech Coalition was launched alongside the release of this report as the call to action. The way that we operate, so tech companies join the coalition at various tiered levels. We are able to pool that funding and re-grant it to programs and initiatives that are in alignment with our very specific and very intentional mission, which is to double the number of Black, Latina, and Native American women graduating with computing baccalaureate degrees by 2025. And every time I say that, I have a little bit of a panic attack because 2025 is next year. So again, a little bit about how are we doing it. We're an interesting model where we're a funder, but we're also a nonprofit. But focusing on the interventions that we know help make and keep women sustained in these programs and initiatives and show success through data on how they can achieve these goals. So throughout our course, we're following the class of 2025. So when Reboot first launched, these students were in high school. So all of our programs were focused on ramps and interventions to attract girls into computing. So an example would be we partnered with the KIPP Charter School Network. And for those that aren't familiar, it's a national network of charter schools, mostly Black and Brown students in those schools. And so we train the teachers to teach advanced placement computer science because the data shows that when students have access and exposure to take APCS, they're more likely to major in computing when they go to post-secondary. But as we all know, by just having the class, the boys only tend to show up. So we offered an incentive for the schools that were able to reach gender parity in their classes. And in the first year of the partnership, 14 out of 19 schools were able to reach gender parity. So it's one example of what we did in K-12. So how do we help build confidence? How do we help create that sense of belonging? How do we help get rid of gatekeepers and have more bridge builders along the way? So again, with an intentional focus on how are we recruiting and how are we focusing on retention. is the intersection of how we are doing our investments. So on-ramps again, what's the relevance of the program? Why does the young woman or college student care? What type of exposure and experiences is she granted throughout? And then from a retention, I mean, community really matters. You might have heard of the saying, if you could see it, you could be it. So visible representation is something that is absolutely key. How are we making sure that they have we'll call it, I'm gonna put air quotes around the cheat code. So what's that mentorship and that sponsorship look like? And making sure that we address each program in the way that um, with leaders that are trusted in their community. So we're not going to say, here's some money, go do a thing. It really is, they know their students, their community, their supporters the best. They know what is specifically needed for a student in their local area or their national area, depending on the type of program it is. And really having a level of trust-based philanthropy so that the programs can be most impactful. So that's a little bit about the origin story. And now to like the really intriguing part. In 2022, what was really keeping me up at night was the fact that I was really excited about watching the data, watching the numbers of BLNA women graduate go up, but was horrified at the notion of what was happening with, you might have heard terms like she session with the exodus of women out of industry. And our partners over at Girls Who Code have a report that they produced with Accenture. And there's a metric in there that says 50% of young women leave the tech industry by the age of 35. And I had my moment of panic was, why are we doing all of this work? I myself and all of our grantee partners and others around the space that are intentionally focused on increasing representation, doing all this work for these amazing women to go into industry, look around, be like, this place sucks, and then leave. So we wanted to figure out what was our part in helping to change the narrative. When Reboot first launched, it was we got questions inside us on what is this coalition? Can it be successful? And we have definitely proven that. And so now, really looking to the future, as these women are going to be graduating in the next year, what are the places and environments that they're going to be launching into, and are they ready and prepared to receive them? So as you look at this chart, it is a very visible X. So the orange line that's going up, that's the trend of amazing graduates. We're doing our part. The numbers are going up. But that wavy yellow line that's headed in the wrong direction or headed down, that is the number of BLNA women leaving industry. So something urgent has to happen so that it doesn't impact further the number of graduates. We want to make sure that the women know that this is a space that they can thrive and that is welcoming and inviting, and not even talking about what's happening on the corporate side with regards to data on ROI and being of diverse teams, and what does that look like for innovation and product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the actual numbers, BLNA women account for 16.5% of the total working age population, and right now only are presenting as 4.1% in all the technical roles. So our part to the landscape, and how do we make sure that we help? We released a report last August called System Upgrade, and it's focusing on the gaps between the policies and practices that companies have and the ones that your employees actually want. So I'm going to also preface this is not a DEI report. And I say that again, this is not a DEI report. The focus again is, how do we create internal policies and practices that are going to uplift all of your employees? We have the intentional focus on the least represented. So again, BLNA women in the entire pipeline, whether we're talking about education, K-12 education, post-secondary, or in corporate spaces, BLNA women are the least represented. And so by having an intentional focus on the least represented in the pipeline, it uplifts all women, uplifts all men, uplifts all people of color. So there's a saying that says, rising tides raise all ships. So we partnered with McKinsey and we sought out to gather some data. And we were gathering this data at the top of 2023. And I know that seemed like forever ago, but if you think about the top of last year, so a year ago, in Q4 of 22, tech companies had already started doing layoffs. And the headlines were not great. The impact that we were seeing was not necessarily tech workers being laid off, but our peers that were in HR, our peers that were in DEI, were being impacted by that. And so we're knocking on doors saying, "Hey, company, will you please participate in this survey? Because we want to understand more about your employees." They were like, "No, go away, Dwana." But we did have 27 companies eventually participate in the data gathering, either through surveys or interviews, so that we can understand what is it that you want to accomplish with your employees. Do you have these policies? So we gave both the companies as well as individual contributors a list of 40 plus policies and practices to get their thoughts on that. From the employee standpoint, we had more than 2,000 individuals that were surveyed. A little over half of them identified as BLNA women, and they all had technical titles. The other nearly half were non-BLNA men and women, also with the same technical titles. And we wanted to say, how do these things affect your path, your journey? You being recruited, you being retained, you being advanced. And we had no idea what the data was going to tell us, but what bubbled to the top were 9 amazing policies. If you have the opportunity to look through the report, we wanted to make sure to capture some of the views and the thoughts, or the experiences that the BLNA women had expressed, because when we get to the slide that shows the policies, I don't want you to go, "Oh, most companies have that," or look at it as a checkbox list. So one of the things that is very clear is that the lack of representation leads to isolation. And so I'll let you read through, but I don't think this is something that's specific to any one gender or any one race. I so happened to be at a Lunar New Year celebration this past weekend, and I mean, my husband and I were the only Black alumni that were there, most of which were Asian American. And the lady who was next to me, who happened to be Japanese American, said, "Hey, Dwana, there's only 4 Japanese Americans here. There's 2 Southeast Asian, there's 2 Indian American, and the rest are Chinese." And I think that what I took from that is that we all are looking for connection, and who are the people that we identify with. And so I just give that very brief example because um, I I think we can easily walk into a room and say, "Oop, there's 5 women in this room," and it's easy to notice who's not present. So as we're thinking about things like lack of representation, how do we make sure that we minimize the onlys or the few and have an environment that's inclusive and intentional? BLNA women feel less support from their supervisors or their sponsors. Um, and so thinking about how does that show up when we again look at the cornerstone policies and practices, being intentional with the words or the language, or how are we actually showing up for all of our employees equitably, I think is something we want to keep in mind. And then again, bias in just daily interactions. What is that? How does that show up? As again, we're looking at the policies and the practices. And when you look at this, there's a lot of "I felt," "I feel," and when we think about data, there's the qualitative and the quantitative. And whether a perception is reality, I think is what leaders have to balance. And so if somebody feels like they are not included, taking the opportunity to dive into the why or the how and what can be done about that, I think has to be something that is absolutely necessary. Okay, so what are these policies that I've been alluding to? So as you can see here, we have three categories or three main strategies that the 9 policies fall into. And so the first would be democratizing access to information so that we can level the playing field. The second, how do we increase flexibility and give employees the choice to work the way that they want and work the way that works best? That one's a little bit controversial with corporate America right now, as the pendulum is still swinging back and forth between remote work and hybrid work, in-person work. And then the third, demystifying development by charting clear pathways for career advancement. So under those 3 strategies, we have the actual 9 policies. And so being able to kind of dive in with you guys a little bit. So sharing salary ranges. Some states make that a mandate now, which is awesome. But then I'm fortunate to be in New York, and we're one of the states that shares the range. So when somebody applies for a job, you kind of know what to expect. You know what to negotiate for. You know what you should know if that's not the type of salary that you're looking for, should you apply for it? So you're not wasting your time or their time. So there's lots of benefits to sharing salary ranges. Assigning a mentor. I'm going to talk about this one a little bit more in a little bit because I think this one is kind of a new school policy. I'm going to put air quotes around new school. But assigning a mentor during the interview process. Um, I want to walk through an example with the last one that's listed on here with paid leave. Um, and again, as I said earlier, don't look at this list as a checkbox list. Because I know that all of my partners have paid leave. Many of you have worked for organizations that have paid leave as an option. How this shows up and why this is one of the top 9 for BLNA women could be a variety of reasons. So is there a systems limitation? In my early years at MasterCard, we had to input our time in a workday, and we had to input our time in blocks of 4. So in today's life, I only need 30 minutes to pick up my kids from school, run them to the doctor, back to school, back to the office, and I don't need 4 hours of time to do that. So is it a physical systems limitation where I have a mental, like, I don't want to waste the sick time because I don't only need 30 minutes and not 4 hours. And oh, by the way, when that was brought up in the all employee meeting and our former CEO, Ajay, mentioned it, he was like, oh, just change it. He didn't realize that was a blocker for the people who actually had to submit time, and it wasn't a big deal to him. A second example would be, do your employees see themselves in the policies? So I mentioned I'm a mom. Can I use my sick time to take care of my kids? Or if you're a caregiver, you're caring for elders in your home, can I use my sick time to take my mom to the doctor? So what does it mean for sick time? Is there another policy that I should use instead of sick time when I have these types of scenarios? And so just making sure that the information is clear for all of your employees when they onboard, how to leverage the policy in practice and what to use each of them for. And then last, I will give the example. I will use myself as the example, where my grandmother always used to tell me, Dwana, you must work 3 times as hard to be seen as equal. I've heard that something similar from other immigrants or minorities and often women, where we feel like we have to be present and we have to show up. And so what that equates to is not taking the sick time. And I will say and give an example, even though I'm the CEO of Reboot Representation, I don't always practice what I preach. I worked through COVID in 2022 when I should have been at home and resting and recovering. So how are the leaders in an organization modeling good behavior, and or are they expecting their team to show up when they're sick? Are they expecting that, oh, now that we're in this virtual world, you can be in your bed and off camera on Zoom, and still be on the call? And so, what does that look like? How are we showing up for our teams? Um, One of the key things about these 9 policies is that it's not a checkbox list. I already said that. But how do we iterate on these to make sure that we are creating the best environments for all of our employees? And are you capturing the data to even know who in your employee base is taking advantage of these policies and practices? So my words right now are mostly focused on, hey, to corporate America, do these things. Um, but from the lens of the employee, so as I talk to students and as I talk to those in career, I also want them to be aware of these policies. As they're going on interviews, as they're looking for upward mobility in their own organizations, being able to have the power, have the words to ask about these things. What does it look like if I want to have a flexible work schedule? Do we have that option in our organization? What does it look like if I now want to go hybrid or remote? And is that going to be career limiting with regards to advancement? So again, if these things have shown up as the things that people want, and oh, by the way, 80% of the non-BLNA men and women also want these things. How are we creating environments that are, as I like to say, shoring up the foundations of our organization so that we have longevity for all employees? We can't focus on DEI and inclusion if the person is worried about equitable pay and not able to take their sick time. Um, I know we have some more time, but I said I would talk a little bit about the assigning mentors because some of these are very clear. The assigning mentors is a new school, air quotes, new school policy. And not a lot of companies are doing that. We have a few examples, but let's say you're interviewing for an organization and you're not sure of the lingo. Every organization operates in their own sense of acronyms, and the jobs descriptions or the words may mean something very specific to that company or that organization. So in this example, your mentor would help you understand the process along the way. We're hearing lots of information now where people are submitting a lot of applications that seem to go into this black hole. And so the mentor would then usher you through and say, this is what's happening. This is the phase that you're in. Do you have any questions? Or maybe, yeah, I know that you've applied for this position, but based off of what I heard you say you're interested in, that's not exactly what those words mean. Maybe this other position is a better position for you, and then help usher your resume into that role as well. So companies should want to court their future employees as well. Because when you have that amazing experience when you're entering the company as an individual or a manager, um, it leaves an impression. It makes you want to work there. And you feel seen and you feel heard. You feel like your contributions are going to be valued in that organization, and you're more likely to be an ambassador for them as you are navigating your career in that organization. If you enter a company and you don't feel seen, don't feel heard, don't feel valued, you'll probably be looking for your next role relatively soon. As I'm looking at the list of the 9, the expanded mental health care benefits is something that really popped on the radar in 2020, where that employees are saying that they absolutely want. We need more mental health focus, and that's something that has not yet been standardized across the board. So there is no specific list of what that means to each company. So at one company, mental health benefits may mean um, they they shut down the company on specific days of the month and everybody's off. I've seen that. Other companies may offer access to therapists, and like sick time, you can take time for mental health days. And so I think as we continue to move forward, we'll start to see some standards bubble up across the industry. But again, a lot of employees don't know how to access the benefits that are listed as mental health. So again, being able to have an internal comms campaign as an example, where employees understand what benefits are available to them, and being able to see themselves in those practices becomes extremely important. So I will stop on the deep dive of the 9, and I would love if if you have specific questions, I'm obviously happy to dive further into any of the 9. But what's next for Reboot, as we are super excited about not just putting out a report and saying, "Huh, companies be better." We are implementing a pilot. So Reboot's Chief Impact Officer, Linda Calvin, she is rolling up her sleeves right now and getting ready to work with 5 companies that have said, yes, we would like to be part of the pilot. We haven't given them the 9 that they have. Well, they obviously we have the 9, but we were saying, which of these 9 do you already have? Which would you like to focus on? How do we create an intentional strategy around how this is going to be implemented and measured in your organization? So that's kicking off right now. In addition to the pilot, what we hope to gain from this is capturing the experiences of these organizations and the employees as they implement these policies, so that more companies know that yes, it's there is work involved, but it's not as hard as we think. So how do we show that companies can be intentional, and it's not going to cost them hopefully that much more money? I'm going to put air quotes around that. It is maybe riding the iceberg around the Titanic a bit, but we want to show that other companies are doing this, and it's something that that can be implemented with intentional effort. The other thing we're very excited to roll out this year, based off of feedback that we've gotten, are a digital toolkit. So we have the 9. For those of you that have bedtime reading time outside of your studies, the first report is 104 pages, and the second report that has the cornerstone policies is over 60 pages. And what we hear a lot is leaders that have the power to make change in corporate America don't read these practices, don't read the policies. They don't have time to read the reports. And so we're excited to put in one place digitally all of these not just reports, but what are the things that they need to know in bite-sized formats so that they can make change happen in their organization. There are so many amazing intentional leaders that are like, Dwana, where do we start? So we want to be able to create the menu. They can pick the things they want to start on, and then it's going to be linked to the data and the research so that they have that to back up their as they start to create their strategic plans. So I talked a little bit about rebooting for impact. This is an IMAP, but for those of you that have not seen the report, we try to make things very intentionally actionable. So what does it look like? Step 1, leverage and disaggregate data. That's like one of the things I'm always going to say. So at a very minimum, they need to disaggregate by race and gender. If they're a global company, that looks different. And so if you have a company that is focused, say in India, for example, gender may be more of a priority than race. But so what does it look like in your organization with regards to disaggregating the data? For companies that are looking at other aspects, so do you know if your employees are caregivers? And you can break down caregiver. Are they caring for children? Are they caring for elders? Are they caring for a partner? Are they a veteran? So what are the things that you care about that represent your employee base? And then continuously improve on the third step. So first getting the data, then being able to set the foundation for how you want to continue to grow, continue to enhance, and continue to iterate. So already mentioned, this is what we're super excited to be doing. How do we're here to continue to share, continue to help. I've suggested Linda is is free consulting for companies that are willing, interested to make impactful change. And we're ready for questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Dwana.